Hey, good morning, friends. Can you believe it? We're almost halfway through the book of Nehemiah. We're starting chapter 6 today. Probably take us 2 to 3 devotional times together to get through chapter 6 because I really want to make sure that we get all the material that's in there and understanding the context and exegeting the text itself. But we're nearly halfway done. It's been so encouraging to see what we've been able to learn here in the book of Nehemiah. And one thing I wanted to make mention of, just with my seminary training and having the opportunity to be taught by some very gifted men in ministry, one of the commentaries that I'm actually reading as I'm going through this book is written by one of my professors, Dr. T.J. Betts. He has been an instrumental figure for me in rekindling a love for the Old Testament. There's so many believers that think that the New Testament is the only thing they need to read and the only thing that they need to be studying, when in fact the opposite is true. And I don't mean that we abandon the New Testament for the Old Testament, but that the whole counsel of God is truly that, the full canon of Scripture, and that we understand the New Testament better as we understand what the Old Testament says and how all these things pointing to Christ, helping us to see the fulfillment of Scripture. And as I also study through this text, I'm reminded that I've got a great opportunity coming up here in November to actually go to Israel and see some of these things that we've been studying together. I'm still trying to raise the last few $100s of support for that. So I'm looking forward to that trip. Love to have some people partner with us and helping to see that get fully funded. But I'm excited that as we finish this study together, then hopefully later on in the year, I'll be able to come back and share pictures and things that help kind of give us a physical illustration of some of the stuff that we've been studying throughout this series. But, we've talked about Ezra and Nehemiah in some parallels. For instance, we talked about Ezra in chapter 4, that it talked about, this complaint that was given to Artaxerxes, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but that there are similarities and things that have gone on between the book of Ezra and now in the book of Nehemiah, and how a lot of these other minor prophets have tied into the book of Nehemiah, like Zechariah and others. But I want you to notice that the temple was rebuilt in the first 6 chapters of Ezra. And also, you see in the first 6 chapters of Nehemiah, we have the wall that's rebuilt. Interesting parallel there. Now, what's even more interesting is that in the rest of the book of Ezra, from chapter 7 through 10, there's going to be this community rebuilding, and they're going to be dealing with this issue of mixed marriages. Well, that issue doesn't go away, because as we're going to see when we finish chapter 6 in Nehemiah and move into chapter 7 through 13, yes, there's going to be this continual issues with the enemy and so forth, but on top of that, there's also going to be community rebuilding and dealing with this issue of mixed marriages as well. Those are things we'll dive into deeper further on into the text, but I just want you to see how Scripture is not just pockets of things that have happened throughout time. Just like in historical events, there's context, there's cause and effect, there's things that have been going on in other portions of Scripture that all ties together. But now as we look at chapter 6, we're going to look at verses 1 through 9 this morning. We're going to look at this third wave of attack is what I'm calling it. And let me begin by reading it for us together. It says, "Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, 'Come, and let us meet together at Hakkephrim in the plain of Ono.' But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them, saying, 'I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?' And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. In the same way Sanballat for the 5th time sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. And it was written, 'It is reported among the nations,' and Geshem also says it, 'that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together. Then I sent to him, saying, no such things as you have said have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hand will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen our hands. So the first wave doesn't work. The second wave doesn't work. Now wave number 3 comes up. Yes, the wall is finished, but the gates still need to be restored. We see that in verse 1. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the rest of our enemies, heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates. So while a ton of work has been finished, there's still other work to be done. This was a massive feat that these people took on and completed, but the finer details still needed some attention, namely these gates. And so the enemies of Israel know that once these gates are finished, their only way to try to go after Jerusalem will be with a direct military assault. So they're trying to be a little more conniving. Now they're plotting against them again. And so in this third wave, Nehemiah is going to deal with these outsiders that only wish to cause harm and confusion, trouble and despair for these people in Jerusalem. We see in verse 2, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come and let us meet together at Hakafrim in the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm. So to paraphrase here, these guys are basically saying, hey, look, Nehemiah, we've kind of come to our senses. We realize now that you guys aren't going away, and we know that we're going to have to be neighbors with each other. So perhaps we should bury the hatchet, as it were. Let's find some common ground. Tell you what, let's meet in an equidistant, neutral location in Ono so we can have a conference together. I mean, that seems harmless, right? Except Ono is 27 miles away from Jerusalem. Now, yeah, it's neutral. It's equidistant from these other nations. But it also would have been a great place to kill Nehemiah if they desired to do that, and then cause the work to disband. And Nehemiah is no fool. He knows these guys are interested in harming them. They're not interested in hanging out. They're not interested in the good of the people. Now, I don't know if you picked up on it earlier as I read this, but Nehemiah calls them flat out their enemies in verse 1. These are our enemies. He makes no bones about that. Nehemiah isn't messing around. He knows that their invitation is not altruistic. And he's likely understanding that this was a way to woo him away from the city, either to kill him or to let other people invade while he's away, or to severely threaten him. Whatever their evil intentions are, he's not going to put up with it. And so basically, just as easily as they offer the request, Nehemiah shuts them down. He's very brief with them, but he's also very clear. Because we look at verse 3, it says, and I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? So rather than going to them himself, which is a wise idea, he sends messengers, just like they're going to do here coming up in verses 4 and 5. And he's informing these guys, look, I have no intention of engaging in whatever this council is of yours or having a discussion, as some kind of fabricated diversion here from the task at hand. Because as we saw in verse 1, there are gates that need to be finished. Now, just take a step back for a second. The wall is done. Now, maybe you're guilty of this like I am, but you ever start on like a really big project and you get the hardest part of the project done, right? And you look back on it and you're like, this is great. I got this finished. Like if you put brand new cabinets in your kitchen, something like that. But you still have to put the doors on. You still have to put the other hardware in place. And so instead of saying, oh, but look at this great accomplishment, look at the hard part that we got done, Nehemiah is trying to push through to the end. Yes, the wall is done. We've still got the gates. We still have things that need to be finished up. And notice that he's calling this a great work. I mean, that's important because it's a description of what he's doing, and he's giving it a particular context. Because I want you to understand, Nehemiah is not calling this a great work because it was authorized by the king of Persia. It's not a great work because it's going to make Nehemiah famous for years to come. It's going to permanently seal his name in the annals of history. It's not a great work because of the number of people involved, although there is a great amount of people. It's not about the size of the task, which again is Herculean in nature. It's not even about how quickly they finish building it. I mean, 52 days, that's a big deal. But those aren't the things that make it a great work. Although by our standards, on a very temporal level, we would probably say that is what makes it a great work. But Nehemiah is calling this a great work because it's being done at God's behest. This is for the glory of God. These walls are being rebuilt to protect Israel. Jerusalem is not being rebuilt for them as much as it is to make much of God's name. That's what makes this a great work. And just by way of application, let me remind us, friends, that if what you're doing, whether it's teaching in a Sunday school class, whether it's evangelizing a neighbor or coworker, whether it's raising a family, or it's growing in godliness in your own personal walk with the Lord, if those things are being done to glorify God and they are being done in obedience to Him, you also are doing a great work. Don't miss the forest for the trees, as it were. Most of the great work that we do for God is going to be in the unseen, the unnoticed, the unrecognized things. It's not going to be the large, grandiose kind of things that get all the applause and all the attention. You know, it's people like you and me consistently being obedient to the Lord because we love Him and because we want to make much of who He is. Loving God and loving others is a great work for each of us. But let's move on here in our passage. And in verse 4, and they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. I love the way Nehemiah puts this. They came after me 4 times, saying the exact same thing every time. So I just gave them the same response. You know, not only are these enemies of Israel bad, they're just annoying. They came at Nehemiah, the same message, the same excuses 4 times. They approach him with the same questions, the same requests. Of course, the intention is always the same. They want to distract, they want to dismantle the project, and Nehemiah responds in kind. Hey, look, same excuses, same response. Hey, Nehemiah, let's get together and talk. I don't have time for your pettiness and your facade of camaraderie. 4 times. Now, to their credit, at least while being the enemies of Israel, at least they were consistent in trying to be so off-putting with these requests. But now we see in verses 5 through 7 that Sanballat's going to up the ante. This guy's not stupid, we're going to discover here. Let me read the passage again. In the same way, Sanballat for the 5th time sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. In it was written, it is reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. And now the king will hear of these reports. So now come and let us take counsel together. So we could either call this the 4th wave of attack, or we could settle on making this kind of like wave 3, level 2. I mean, it's the same idea. This wave in general is just this, vicious, or this vitriol of communication, really, that's seeking to undermine everything that's going on. And it's the same approach as the last 4 attempts. But this time there are massive rumors attached. I mean, we could really call this just an early episode of fake news before it was all over television. The situation is different because of its intended audience. It's not just these guys going to Nehemiah and saying, hey, come here, let's go have a conversation. Now there's an open letter involved. But first I want you to notice that this whole strategy of writing a letter, complaining, making up stuff, this is the same strategy that Sanballat used in Ezra 4 to get the work to stop. Now, but instead of writing to Artaxerxes this time, he's writing to Nehemiah directly. And he's spreading this rumor and these lies, like in Ezra 4, when that reached Artaxerxes' ear, everything halted. This time he's going to approach Nehemiah. And notice that it says that he sent his servant to Nehemiah with an open letter. And this open letter, as James Montgomery Boyce puts it, it is a read letter, meaning that it's likely this letter was read and shared with all the towns and nations that the servant traveled through on his way to Nehemiah in Jerusalem. So as he is traveling, this servant is doing damage constantly as he travels from place to place. He's reading this letter. The rumors are already starting. So by the time it gets to Nehemiah, there's already been social damage. This would have been an intentional campaign to sow gossip among the people. I mean, it's nothing less than character assassination of Nehemiah and a questioning of his motives. How sadly that rings true today among churches and leadership also. This idea here, though, this intentional assassination of Nehemiah's character, what's behind this approach is that this servant would arrive, having already read this letter to a bunch of other people. The rumor's already spread, it's already gaining traction, and now he's going to read it publicly before Nehemiah and the rest of the people there in Jerusalem. And the intention is to sow discord and doubt and fear among the people. If they can't get the leader to budge, maybe they can get him to budge when the people are all scared. I mean, it's nothing more than a bullying and scare tactic that Sanballat uses to try to stop the work from being 100% complete. But notice, though, that Sanballat's not using complete lies. He's taking these sort of half-truths and these real events, but what he's doing with them is he's misconstruing them. He's misinterpreting them. He's linking up the wrong facts together to spin his own little narrative, which in the ears of the people seems plausible just enough so that they can buy into what Sanballat is saying. Doesn't that remind you of what a lot of the liberal media in our time frame does? But remember, let me remind us, as Solomon wisely said, there is nothing new under the sun. This is just a prime example. We've got fake news, false narratives, malevolent spins on facts that have been going on since the fall. But let's break down Sanballat's letter and just see the intentionality in his attacks against Nehemiah. He first says, it's reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it. Let's stop there. So essentially he's saying, there are those who believe, or I've heard it from several people, or the proverbial, hey, don't tell anybody this, but... I mean, it kind of sounds like the beginning of church gossip, doesn't it? Who are these other nations? Why does Geshem in Arabia have any clout for saying this? I mean, is throwing Geshem into the mix supposed to add any kind of validity to what you're saying here, Sanballat? Well, people are talking. Just want to make sure you're aware. Come on. And then he says, this is the rumor, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That's why you're building the wall. And so again, they're putting a negative spin that gives some plausibility to what they're saying. Oh, you're just building the wall because you want to rebel against the king. Honestly, you could try to perceive it that way. I mean, why would a bunch of Jews go all the way back to Persia, from Persia back to Jerusalem, to rebuild a wall around their city? I mean, whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter. To them, they're preying upon this negative perception. That's what they're using as their attempt to stop what's going on. I mean, a group of people coming all the way back, traveling hundreds of miles to Jerusalem to fortify a ruined city. Yeah, that could look like an act of rebellion, regardless of what their intentions were. Never mind the fact that the king authorized it. Never mind the fact that the king has financed the project. Oh, you're just trying to rebel. And if that's not bad enough, what's worse is that honestly, Judah has a history of rebelling against rulers. Actually, if you read 2 Kings chapter 25, you'll see that twice the people of Judah rebelled under Nebuchadnezzar. So their own reputation kind of plays into this half-truth that Sanballat's setting up. See, he's not an idiot. He knows how to use facts to his advantage to spin a negative perception of these people. And he's not even done. And according to these reports, it says at the end of verse 6, you wish to become their king. In the first part of verse 7, you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, there is a king in Judah. Now, granted, Nehemiah is already serving as the governor there, and it could appear, perhaps, that Nehemiah is building his own little kingdom. But again, appearances are not always what's going on. Rather than asking for clarification, they're making accusations. And Nehemiah has no intention of being king. Rather, we understand that Nehemiah is longing for the one true king who has been promised through the Davidic line to come to rule and to reign in Jerusalem one day. And that is Jesus Christ. You know, back in Ezra, Zechariah had already prophesied earlier to the people there that a Davidic Messiah would come and restore Jerusalem, as Dr. Betts puts it, to a future and independent glory. And you see, Sanballat here is using his cunningness with these half-truths to try to piecemeal this giant rumor that might, if everybody embraces it, just cause everything to fall flat. So then he concludes the letter by saying, and now the king will hear these reports. Nehemiah, word's going to get out, man. You're going to look really bad. So come, let us take counsel together. I mean, he's essentially saying, hey, I mean, you don't want the king to find out, right? So let us help you. We're your friends, all of a sudden. Why don't you sit down with us and we can work on a strategy to respond to these rumors and help you out? This duplicitous nature of Sanballat here. I mean, really? I mean, Nehemiah would honestly have to be a special kind of stupid to think that these guys really had his best interests in mind. Guys, that would be a radical change of heart after the jeers and the bullying and the threats to invade from before. But I want you to notice how Nehemiah responds. We see just this evil nature of Sanballat and their enemies. Gershom also is pointed out. I'm sure Tobiah is in there somewhere, you know, bending someone's ear, being a part of this whole conspiracy. But look at what Nehemiah does in verses 8 and 9. Then I said to him, saying, no such things as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out of your own mind. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hand will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. I love this response. He doesn't chase down the rumors. He doesn't try to investigate and figure out who said what and when. You know, we can expel a lot of energy trying to chase down rumors and who said what. He doesn't try to investigate. He just outright rejects it all. Everything that's been said. He doesn't confirm or deny anything in the letter. Essentially, in verses 8 and 9, he calls Sanballat a liar, and he just keeps working. Look, Sanballat, these things never happened. You're making it all up. You've got a great but misguided imagination. Your only intention is to scare us and get us to stop working. I'm sorry, that's just not going to work. We've got things to do. We don't have time for this nonsense. But then notice in verse 9, after rebuking Sanballat, just outright condemning the rumors, he goes to God in prayer. Again, friends, don't miss this elevated view of prayer that Nehemiah has throughout the book. In every tumultuous situation, he turns to God in prayer. And he prays, "Oh God, would you strengthen our hands?" Listen to what Nehemiah is saying here. He's not saying, "God, would you protect us from our enemies? Lord, would you make everything right and vindicate us from these rumors? Lord, would you help us to endure this persecution, this intimidation? Father, would you bring reproach and condemnation on these enemies?" Those would be appropriate responses, I think. But I'm just a carnal human being. And perhaps maybe I'm thinking in my flesh in that way. Nehemiah doesn't do that. Rather, he says, "God, would you simply equip us with the needed strength to continue to obey you and to finish the work that you've given us?" So even in his prayer, it's prioritized on the task that God has commissioned for them. So friends, I think a couple things that we can take away from this is perhaps we could, by way of example, see how to respond when we are maligned, when we face vitriol from others, when there are rumors said about us. "Oh, he's not doing his job right. Oh, he's da 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 da." Rather than waste energy defending ourselves, let God defend us. Sure, we could respond and say, "You know what? Everything you're saying is false." Or there's only a glimmer of truth behind what you're saying, but you're twisting it all out of context. Rather than waste time defending ourselves, maybe we should respond like Nehemiah and say, "You know what? God's got this. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to keep obeying God. I'm going to keep doing what God's calling me to do," and just leave it at that. But also, again, to be reminded that when we face situations like this, when we face assaults from the enemy, do we seek God's face in prayer like Nehemiah did? And even in our prayer, do we remind ourselves to be focused on what God has called us to do and not be so consumed with everything going on around us? Friends, I just hope that this study through these verses this morning encourages you as you prepare to come and worship with us this weekend. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to studying more in Nehemiah chapter 6 with you next time.